Hello and welcome to another episode of Hot Lunch, a camera and camera equipment review show from Ireland where we look at camera gear from the perspective of working videographers. And I've hidden my increasingly ridiculous pandemic hair under a hat for today's episode, in which we will be looking at a piece of gear that I'm very excited to review, because it's not just one, it's several. It is the Zeiss CP3 lens range, and it's something that I personally have wanted to try for a very long time, a really professional range of cinema lenses with cinema glass and that lovely smooth focus and aperture action that you get only on the kind of higher end lenses like this. So we were given these lenses, as always, by channel sponsor Camerakit.ie, who kindly lent us them for an extended period for this review, and we made sure to try them in a whole bunch of different scenarios and on multiple cameras. And we'll get to why we did that later, but suffice it to say that these are extraordinarily fun set of lenses to use, and it was an absolute pleasure to review something as professional and well made as this lens series. So we used the EF mount version of these lenses, as we are of course using the Blackmagic cinema range. The lenses come in a variety of different options, both in terms of mount and also data. You can also get a version of these lenses called the XD, or extended data, which carry metadata information like lens distortion and the focal length of the lens and so on, straight through the PL mount if you have like an ARRI camera that supports PL with information, or alternately through a locket device to any kind of metadata storage device for use on a film set. These are not that version of the lens. They lack that kind of built-in metadata information. So we initially tried the lens on the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema 4K. Paul and myself both use this camera. He has the Viltrox adapter for EF lenses because of course it's a micro four thirds native mount on the Blackmagic 4K. I use the Metabones adapter. They're both focal reducers, which increase the amount of brightness. They give you an effective f-stop more of light into the camera, and they also increase the field of view while also allowing you to use EF lenses. So you're getting closer to that Super 35 sensor size in your final image when you put on a lens like this, a prime lens, or like the Sigma 18-35 lens that I use myself. What I was kind of feeling was that there was a softness to the image, something that I wasn't particularly happy with. And you know, you're using really expensive glass. This is the kind of glass that you buy for a lifetime, and it will grow with you as a cinematographer or videographer. So you want it to be, you know, pleasing but also sharp, maybe not tack sharp because you want some kind of feel to the footage, but you want sharpness. And I was thinking, God, you know, these lenses I really would have thought would be sharper, but I guess that's how cinema lenses are. You know, my experience with cinema glass is limited. What it turned out, of course, is that this is not an issue with the lenses at all, and thankfully Camerakit were kind enough to lend us one of the new Blackmagic Pocket Cinema 6K cameras, which is a native EF Canon mount. So we were able to throw that on there and confirm that both in 6K mode, which is obviously going to be sharper, but also in 4K mode on that camera, which is, you know, maybe a tad sharper but not hugely different to 4K on the Pocket Cinema 4K, that it was the fault of the adapters. So even with the Metabones and a Viltrox, you're not getting the full sharpness of the lens. Now, some of that is because these focal reducer adapters that everyone is using do need to be tuned to the camera that they're on, and they can become less in focus over time. So when you buy them, they come with a little tool that lets you unscrew the lock and move the lens and manually correct to make sure infinity works. And that is something that I will need to go and do on my lens, and terrifies me, but I'm going to have to do it because they can change over time. But moreover, my Metabones is really tack sharp with a lens when run on a micro four thirds device it was designed for, like say the Panasonic GH5 or G85, my old tiny little camera that got me into videography. The flange distance, the distance from the sensor to the end of the mount, and the other kinds of variables mean that used on the Blackmagic cameras, which came out long after the Metabones was available, while it does work and support a wide variety of lenses, there isn't the same level of perfect sharpness. Now, Metabones do sell an adapter just for the Blackmagic cameras, and I'm quite sure that that is far more perfectly configured to the slightly different field of view, which is actually slightly wider. I think the sensor is maybe a little bit larger than the Panasonic GH5, but certainly the flange distance, and that's all corrected for in the design of that adapter. I got my adapter secondhand. It's an older Metabones Ultra 0.71 adapter, so it's not going to be perfect for that device. But again, it is something that you can improve on by ensuring that infinity is properly focused on the device. It's a little scary. You've got to unscrew it and manually kind of change the orientation of the magnifier lens within the device itself. And it's something that I will do. But for right now, working natively on the 6K, you can see just how sharp these lenses are. They're full frame lenses and they come in a variety of mounts, but also the mounts are user interchangeable. So you can, let's say today, buy the EF version, and then later down the road, if you move to a different platform, let's say you want PL version, you can buy the new mount, unscrew it and put it on yourself. And it's not microsurgery. Obviously it's a little bit more complicated than clipping something off, but it's readily doable, and that will ensure that the distance is perfect and you won't have any kind of issues. So as long as you're using this lens natively, it's going to be great. So it comes in a variety of mounts, as I mentioned, and there's quite a variety. It comes in PL, EF, Nikon F, and Sony E mount, as well as micro four thirds. And as I mentioned, you can switch in and out if you buy those third party, or you can just buy them in your preferred setup and stick to that. This is a hugely powerful feature because it means that, you know, let's say you buy these and these are full frame lenses. So you buy these today for your GH5, or you buy them today for your, you know, Sony A7S. You will be able to keep that lens as you move maybe to a more full featured camera system down the road. Maybe you're going to buy an FX9, a C500 Mark II, something like that. You're not going to have to switch out all your lenses. And part of the reason why they really are as expensive as they are, properly cared for and maintained, a set of lenses like this could last you an entire career. And when I say professional, these are real pro gear. You could absolutely shoot a feature film with these lenses, and it would look fantastic if the color grade is done right and the production design, and you're using a decent camera, you have some good actors, you can get cinema level quality out of this glass, and it's a wonder to shoot with. So let's talk about some of the features of it as shooting glass. So they're compact primes, which means they're small compared to traditional primes. This might look large and chunky in my hand, you know, if you're used to a very small, say, micro four thirds lens, but my goodness, is it much smaller than the equivalent prime lenses, which can be, you know, several feet long. That also comes with the lightness that you don't associate with this kind of glass. It is built to be light, and what that means is not only are you able to hand use it with a DSLR or a mirrorless camera like the Blackmagic cameras, but this will even fly on a gimbal. So I was able to use my Crane 3, not the new Crane 3S fancy one that everyone's getting, but the old Crane 3, and I was able to use this straight on the gimbal and walk around using it as I would my Sigma 18-35, even though it is a little bit weightier. That means that you have all of those PED, dolly, tracking shot features that you wouldn't get without, you know, building a dolly or renting a dolly with a gimbal with this lens. That's something that will let you make films to a more professional standard for less. It's a concrete advantage. They also, as cinema glass, are designed to be used with a matte box, external matte box, external NDs. So if your camera doesn't have internal NDs, be aware of that. That said, the glass itself is situated quite deep into the lens body. So a lot of the reason that you might use a matte box is to have those barn doors on the side that block out hazing and bright light. So when you're shooting with the sun behind your talent, you don't want to get that loss in contrast that you get when you, even if it's not directly, maybe the sun is slightly out of shot. That awful hazing, which you can certainly see on a phone video where there's no kind of ND and the lens is right against the body of the phone, where you're losing contrast, you're losing detail because the sun is basically bouncing around inside the lens. Because the glass is so deeply embedded, and also because the lens has been coated in a material to reduce this kind of hazing, I found that actually you'd need a matte box on this way less than you'd expect. We were shooting in the brightest sun that we have literally ever had in Ireland during an Indian summer, and we were able to shoot outside with really no hazing issues whatsoever, which is very different from the Sigma 18-35 that I'm used to, where you will get a lot of hazing in bright light and you really do need that ND filter. So obviously there's two reasons to use an ND. One is to cut down the amount of light entering the lens, and you still do need an ND if you want to do that, if you want to shoot at a very, very high bokeh but in bright light. But for the hazing element, you might not need an ND at all, which is an amazing aspect of these lenses, something I hadn't anticipated. So one of the things that I found really refreshing about these lenses is that they have a really great color tone on skin. And that's something that's really strange to talk about, because there are many sources of color for a camera. There's, of course, the color science built into the camera, how it processes color in the pipeline of technology within the camera. There's the color space you're recording in, there's the codec you're recording in, and of course there's your grade, whether you're shooting in log or not in log, and how you grade it. All of these things, of course, massively affect color. And yet there is an effect of lenses too. So I definitely found the color tones with this on skin much more appealing than on the Sigma 18-35. There is something about the softness of the highlight roll-off that the lens achieves, and which is probably partly to do with the quality of the glass, probably partly to do with the amount of blades, and there's 14 blades within the lens, and probably also partly to do with the lens coating. But anyway, they all combine to give you this kind of lovely, vivid, cinematic skin tone that really screams cinema glass. As you approach quality with your films, let's say, or even your corporate videography, what you realize is it's not a linear curve, right? It's very easy to get something to initially to look better than a phone, and then it's a bit more difficult to get it to look better than a cheap DSLR, and then when you want to look a lot better, then you're getting into using good lights, shooting in maybe in RAW or in very high bit depth, using better glass. Each incremental step in quality requires much more money, much better equipment. And so when you're getting into that, like whether something looks cinematic or not, in other words, like a feature film, people are going, well, maybe Arri looks more cinematic than Red, maybe Red looks more cinematic than Blackmagic. Part of that magic, that special sauce, is that look that a lens gives you. And as I mentioned, these are full frame lenses, so you get to stick them on a full frame camera. We didn't have one, unfortunately, for our test this time, but this is a lens that you can stick right on your new full frame Canon, Sony, or if you're incredibly lucky, your full frame Arri camera, and it will completely cover the sensor. And that's also a change from the CP2s. I think most of the CP2 range covered the full sensor, but the 18mm didn't. With these CP3s, all of the range cover the full frame sensor on pretty much every camera on the market, right the way up to the Arri Alexa LF at the very, very top. As cinema lenses, they also have consistent T-stops. What that means is, that's f-stops effectively, but where f-stops are hypothetical measures of how much light is getting into the camera, with cinema glass, they test the lenses and you ensure that you're getting the same T-stop all the time. So the numbers are the same as f-stops, it's not complicated, but they're more reliable and accurate. So you can switch out to any of the lenses in this range and you'll know that at T2.9, T2.1, you're going to get the exact same amount of light as you will with all the other lenses in the range. Now, some of the lenses are f2.1 and some are 2.9. The very, very widest three lenses in the range, I believe, are 2.9 and the rest are all 2.1. So these aren't super speed lenses. That said, 2.1 is still relatively fast, especially if you're using a camera which is better in low light. It's something to be aware of if you do have that very, very super speed need. But even on feature films, it's very rare that people are shooting in f1.4. It's more of a videography thing. What they will tend to do is rent super speed lenses just for those scenes. So for example, in There Will Be Blood, I think there may be 2 or 3 scenes that have a few shots shot on super speed lenses. The rest are all on regular speed lenses. I mentioned highlight roll-off, and again, this is part of the special sauce of a cinema lens. It's something intangible, something subtle. But I found the highlight roll-off was subtle and more pleasing than on the Sigma lens. Now, the Sigma 18-35 is a spectacular lens. It's a really great entry-level professional zoom lens. Less than €1,000, great for many, many run and gun type things. But what you'll find is, as you get more experience with a lens like that, there are a couple of things that stick out. One, it's highly contrasty, which is kind of weird. How does a lens affect that? But it does. And it's sharp but contrasty. And it also has horrific focus pull. So it's uncomfortable and difficult to pull focus, and it's very difficult to do without shaking the camera, even on a heavy stand. This has amazing focus pull. Now the throw ring is very long, which is designed really for use with some kind of mechanical or electronic follow focus, like a tilt and nucleus type device. And that's also something that you can rent or purchase from Camerakit in Ireland. And that kind of device, what that will let you do is not only fly by wire so that you can have a focus puller or director watching remotely, let's say using a video terror deck or something, and pulling focus for you so you can keep both hands on your shoulder rig or whatever, but it will also let you set repeatable focus points. So basically you configure it to say, on this lens, infinity is over here, and what it lets you do is say, I only want to pull this much and I want the lens to pull loads. So you can narrow down that long focus throw. But on the plus side, if you are doing it handheld, and we did do almost all of our shooting handheld for this test, and it is doable, it lets you very, very carefully focus track a subject as they walk off or walk towards the camera. That's something that, you know, I'm not hugely experienced with, but my goodness, is it easier than on a lens designed for photography like the Sigma Art. You know, it's designed for you to pull focus, and it tells you the distances on the lens. So if it says, you know, 14 inches or 16 inches or 1 foot, and you know the subject is 1 foot away, it will be in focus. But what it will let you do is, by eye, looking at your monitor, very carefully pull focus onto their face or eye, or track them as they move, and it is doable even handheld. So again, this has 14 blades, which gives you this beautiful bokeh, especially obviously when used on the larger sensor of the Blackmagic 6K, but even on the Pocket 4K, I found the bokeh very pleasant, and you do get that nice depth of field. All the lenses in the range, bar the 100mm, are all the same size. At least that's all the ones that are offered by Camerakit. The 18, the 25, the 35, the 50, the 85 and the 100, all of which come in your rental kit if you get the complete rental kit from Camerakit. And they're all the same size, as I say, bar the 100. And even the 100 has the focus ring and the aperture ring in the same place. So if you are setting up on set and you do have something like a Tilta Nano, as we mentioned, or a more higher end follow focus solution, pull that off, switch your lens, knock it back on, and be good to go. The 100mm is a larger lens and heavier, but other than that, the weight and size is similar on all of the lenses, so it should reduce the amount of reconfiguration you need, let's say if you're changing them out for gimbal use or on a tripod as well. So all of that means that on a shoulder rig, it'll be readily balanced while switching out the lenses without having to redistribute the weight, especially on a larger camera setup. So let's get into some of the cons of using lenses like this. Obviously, the biggest con, and it's nothing to do with the quality of this lens, is that it's not a zoom lens. You know, it doesn't have multiple focal lengths. So if you're used to using a lens like, let's say, the Fujinon or the Sigma 18-35 or even a Canon zoom lens, you're going to be like, damn, I'm stuck at one focal length. Now look, that is the history of cinema. The better glass is always dedicated cinema fixed focal length glass. Which it's just something you're going to have to get used to as you become a better shooter. And you know, many shooters and many companies will go through a period of time where they don't use any zoom lenses at all, or maybe they never use them, because what that lets the shooters do is become used to how a given lens responds, and to know, let's say this is an 18mm, it will always look like this. So if I'm waiting for a couple coming out of a church, or I want to set up a scene quickly, I know that this is roughly the field of view of an 18, and that's an intuition you don't develop if you're using a zoom lens. But obviously it also comes with that increased quality that you get from building a dedicated lens. And a cinema zoom, although they do exist, you're talking really very, very pricey. So Canon cinema zooms are, I think, in around 20 grand. ARRIs are more like 40 to 80 grand. So if you want to have the same quality as something like this in a zoom lens, it's going to be out of reach for most people. But gradually building a family of cinema glass, once you've decided on what kind of lenses you want, is obtainable for the average videographer when you're spending a couple of thousand maybe, or several thousand on a lens, and you're doing that, you know, maybe one a year. You can in a few years build a professional set of cinema lenses. So these lenses aren't immune to focus breathing. In other words, as you pull focus, there is a small shift in the effective zoom of the lens. So even though these are fixed focus, there's this thing that called focus breathing, which happens on almost all lenses. Now that said, it's much reduced from something like the Sigma 18-35, which has really quite considerable focus breathing, and it's way, way, way better than Canon kit lenses or some of those nifty 50 lenses that you might be familiar with that have really quite noticeable focus breathing. It's a very, very minimal effect, but it is there, so it's something to be aware of. So these lenses are designed primarily for on-set use. Unlike, let's say, the Milvis range, also by Zeiss, and they're not weather sealed. So, you know, it's well produced, it is well made, but if you're using it in the field, over time, you're definitely eventually going to need to have it serviced. Whereas a lens that is like the Milvus is weather sealed and maybe designed more for videography purposes will be less kind of amenable to environmental damage, and of course everything breaks over time, but it'll be better in, you know, rain and sandy conditions and so on. What you lose though on those lenses is your aperture wheel, and this is something that if you're not used to a cinema lens is really revelatory, because when you're using let's say Blackmagic with the Sigma, I keep going back to that, but that's my go-to shooting, you're changing aperture by using the wheel on the camera, so it's incremental. It's hard stops of aperture. Now, that has two things it does. It's kind of clicky as you change it, but it's visible that it's in those gradations. So you don't really want to be changing aperture on the fly. But with this lovely aperture wheel, you can pull aperture. And that lets you do things like softly and subtly adjust for changes in lighting that happen anytime you're shooting outside. And it lets you, you know, pull aperture to blow out the scene if you want to do kind of a natural fade to white, all those kinds of lovely effects that you're never going to be able to do on a camera lens rather than a cinema lens. Obviously, as we mentioned, these are not super speed lenses, so these are 2.1. You know, it's a reasonably fast lens, but it's not what you want for night filming effectively. And as I mentioned, the very wider lenses are 2.9. It's not as much of a problem as you might think. You get great bokeh when you are down at f2.9 or f2.1. I'm always quite worried about using my lens fully open, certainly through an adapter, but in general, you're going to get softness on a lot of lenses when they are wide open. With these lenses, you really don't see that. There's very little additional softness when it's wide open. The whole range of the T-stops is going to stay sharp and clear. So overall, really there's a thrilling image out of these lenses. You know, once you get past the fact that you have to change lenses and you get comfortable with shooting on them. I know an FS7 shooter who shoots exclusively for everything on 50mm, and he gets amazing stuff because he knows where to put the camera. He knows, I'm on Super 35 sensor, I have 50mm, this is what it will look like in a street, this is how far I should be away from a person, this is how I want to capture a nature scene, because he's learned that. Once you learn how to use these lenses at their various focal lengths, you'll be changing them out much less than you might think. And let's say you're out on a 2-camera shoot, one person might have the relatively wide lens, one person has the telephoto, and you know, I'm getting my people cutaways, I'm getting my nature cutaways or my wide shots, and that will kind of come as second nature. The image is beautiful. It is really not something that you're going to see the like of for a lot less money. These kinds of lenses are exceptionally well made, and it was a pleasure to use them. And as I say, the pulling focus like this, pulling aperture like this, it's an absolute joy coming from a clunky camera lens, and it's certainly a range that I would consider getting into if I was looking at building my own library of glass. And of course you can rent as well as buy them from Camerakit in Ireland. They're available right now. They do a full kit and you can rent or buy individual lenses, and you can of course test them in Camerakit itself. So you can go in and they have a kind of a Lego setup with little houses and cars and stuff, and you can see and take away maybe the footage on your own camera and look and see how it compares to what you already have and whether you're ready to get into the world of cinema glass at this level of quality. So thanks again to Camerakit, and thanks for tuning in. This has been Hot Lunch.